What's up, y'all? It's Cousin Chet. Here today with Julian. Julian, thanks for coming out. Good to see you again, bro. It's gonna be a little bit awkward, just so you know. We're gonna do the practicing, like talking to the camera thing. So, like talking to each other. I know in previous videos I have a habit of doing this because I am a talker and a listener, conversationalist, and so it just is natural for me to talk in that way. So bear with us as we try to make each podcast better. And this is the way we're going to do it today. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks everybody for showing up and watching. Thank you for your love. Appreciate all the algorithm love, all the likes, the shares, the subscribes, comments, anything that's going to help that algorithm get us up there. I think I'm working. I got about 20 or so in the books now, and just moving full steam ahead. So again, we're with Julian today. And Julian came out and joined me for a swim, which is just one of my favorite things to do, one of my favorite exercises to do, and something that benefits me and my health greatly. So how was the water, man?
Awesome. I really enjoy swimming, for sure. Definitely one of my more favorite activities.
And in the process of transitioning from the swim to the podcast, the pod, a topic came up for us that I thought would be interesting, and Julian had mentioned, because I used to have long hair. If you look at some of the older podcasts, you'll see me with longer hair. Julian's growing his hair out. And you asked me a question. You remember what that question was?
Yeah. I guess I led into a question similar to how do you feel about hair as a connection to spirituality?
And my immediate response to that was, it's hard for me to discount because there are so many cultures and traditions who feel that hair has spiritual relevance, and that hair can be is a way of, and the word you used is kind of like an antenna. And one of my favorite people ever in the world was really particular about his hair, and that man was Bob Marley. I don't know if this is true, but my understanding is that Bob Marley had some form of cancer. They wanted to cut his dreadlocks off, and he's like, no, you can't cut my dreads off. I don't know how true that is. I think I've seen pictures of Bob Marley with like shorter hair, so I don't know if he grew his dreads over time or how that worked. But that was one of the things that one of the people that I really look up to and respect in this world. And my understanding is his hair was very important to him, and I think that it was a very spiritual thing. I don't know if that's part of the Rastafarian religion. I know a lot of Rastas have dreadlocks, so I don't know enough about Rastafarian to know if that's the case. But there are also other traditions that I can think of. One of my favorite religions is the Sikh religion. If you don't know anything about the Sikh religion, S-I-K-H, go ahead and search that up quickly. It is it's kind of like a religion that was born out of the wars between the Hindus and Muslims in like the Punjab area of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And actually from the monotheistic, like literally one of my favorite religions. This is one of the religions where the majority of the people that follow the tenets of the religion are actually good people. They don't create a lot of suffering for others, although they are 100% willing to defend and fight to defend people and themselves. Anytime I've ever been to a interreligious event, if the Sikhs are there, they're providing food. My understanding is that in their home, like where they sprouted from, they serve food every day to anyone that shows up. I think it's vegetarian always, but and that's just something I really respect. Do you know much about the Sikhs?
I'm familiar somewhat. I'm familiar with the history of the Sikh. And so I'm familiar, not super familiar.
And one of the things that they do, they wear turbans. So a lot of people, especially after 9/11, in the early 2000s, they would confuse them for Muslims. because they wear turbans. The thing is that turban is holding their hair. Most of them, if they take down, like they don't cut their hair. That's part of their religion is they don't cut their hair. And my understanding is it has some spiritual, religious connotations.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you bring up Bob Marley even. As far as like a Jamaican Rasta style culture, that's actually where I found a lot of my information from. That and like having alkaline sources of nutrients and such. I think it all kind of goes into your charge, so to speak, the frequency at which you're operating. And from the information that I'm gathering, or that I've gathered, is that dreadlocks, actually dreading the hair, amplifies the antenna aspect, the range, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so something that I brought up when we were in the pool is I really forget the name of the photography, and I forget it every single time because it's a specific style and it's really got a weird name. However, it's a photography that is used, they use a certain type of lens that amplifies certain rays, certain vibrations, and it, when taken a portrait of someone, you can see their aura, so to speak, their vibrational energy, and it presents itself in a range of different colors, and usually that's dependent on the vibrational frequency. And so, from what I could see, everyone with longer hair had a warmer color, which signifies higher frequency, and they had a larger aura of frequency, more perceivable, right? Almost like a lion's mane around their head. And I believe that's because your energy is amplified through your hair. And some aspect.
You think they're just picking up on like heat signatures?
Well,
I mean, heat's an energy. I get that.
I don't necessarily.
Because my understanding is like 80% of our heat escapes through our head.
I'm not totally sure. It could be related to, but if that were the case, then the signatures wouldn't be so polar. Like you'll see somebody with a very blue aura, and blue and heat signature would usually mean that it's below a certain temperature that wouldn't be coming from your head, right?
Fair enough.
And so I don't know exactly how it's tracked. I think it's from what I understand, it is the vibrational frequency at which your brain is operating, how you're operating. And so probably something similar to radio waves, I'd assume, something similar to that. But it's a really interesting.
You said a vibration, so I mean.
Yeah. And so it's just a really interesting topic for me because since I've began on my kind of free thinker journey, I guess, I have really developed this thought. I haven't cut my hair in now almost 2 years, and I don't plan to cut my hair. I think that, as I said earlier, I think that there's an argument that could be made that it is the output of your recent history. So the things that you experienced or fought with the most over that time period is going to be directly related to your hair. And so why a reason for people who have to reset their identities or things, it's usually a resetting of their entire vanity, and that includes cutting hair most of the time. And so it's a whole reset. That's why it can give you that sense of weight lifted, right? You're no longer responsible for the history that you've lived. And so I kind of think of it similar to that, right?
I know that for me, I go through cycles where I'll grow my hair out and then I'll cut it. Right now I'm in a period where I've recently cut it. And often I definitely will cut it. I love having long hair. I feel like me having my lion's mane is part of who I am, including the beard and the hair and all. But I'll get tired of it. I'll get a wild hair up my butt. It'll be hot. Usually I cut it during the summertime. And I have to say that for me, as a person that deals with different cycles of mental health, often in spiritual health, like oftentimes when it is cut, there is kind of a reset.
Right.
When I, most people are familiar with Samson, the story of Samson in the Bible. Delilah cuts his hair, takes his strength, right? Samson was referred to as a Nazarite. And most people get that confused because Jesus is from Nazareth and they call him a Nazarene. But there was another Nazarite group from the Old Testament that a Nazarite meant a person set apart for God or set apart by God. I don't know how the translation really goes. But for different people, for different reasons, people would be chosen and or they would choose to be Nazarites. And one of the processes of that is you were set aside for God for like some certain period of time. It could have been a period of mourning. It's similar to the way that some Christians will talk about fasting as a form of prayer. And one of the things that they did is they weren't allowed to cut their hair during this time, during this set apart time. And there were some other things they weren't allowed to do. For one, they weren't allowed to be around a dead body. They weren't allowed to touch a dead body, right? There was this purity that they were doing. And so part of what I'm understanding is growing the hair and not cutting the hair was part of this purity. And then whenever the period was over, well, let me back up. If they did something that broke the agreement, so to speak, they'd have to cut their hair and start all over, is my understanding. And so there are a lot of different traditions around the world that look at hair and growing your hair, specifically for men, right? Because women, they think most around the world culturally, women growing their hair long, other than maybe Africans, naturally it's very challenging for them to grow their hair long. But the rest of the world, like, it's a very feminine thing to grow your hair long. It's honestly, in a lot of cases, seen as a feminine thing. And what do you think about that? What do you think about, like, is it spiritual for women? Is it?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I think that human beings, I think a lot of my belief ties back to my big, my decently well constructed idea of source. And so I kind of think of your hair as an antenna, but I also, I don't know, I think of your hair as a kind of entity that represents your past. However, that's exactly kind of what your brain is, right? Your brain becomes what you think about the most. And so you create systems in your brain that allow you to get that information faster. So if you're practicing math and you practice multiplication, you're going to have a lot easier time if if you've been working on multiplication for a month versus just starting. And that's because your brain has created pathways. And so I think that what you do during the time of growing your hair absolutely has something to do with the frequency that can be passed through it as well. And so I think that that's a really interesting idea, that they were made to cut their hair if they did something that tarnished almost their purity, right? And
those are my words, by the way.
Right, but still,
read the scripture
I
yourself.
totally understand what you mean. And so I kind of think of it like that, right? I think of, you cut your hair, you're on a path of pilgrimage now. Like, you are kind of constructing something, right? And so you start, when your hair is cut and you are, experiencing life, you're building that bank of experience and history, recent, most important things that you're going through at the time, right? Because I flip-flop between tons of different things on my walk of free thinking, right? And so, we visited my source consciousness theory before. I visit a lot of different ideas about identity and vanity, ethics, all kinds of philosophy and such. And so as you're kind of going through your path, you're having your most relevant history attached to you, right? That's what's almost like a printer, And so I definitely think that if you were going through a time of hardship where you were mentally unhealthy and you were treating yourself poorly and your thoughts were corrupting your activity and you're suffering with mental health, I think that that's going to tarnish your connection or your ability to amplify your energy, right? And so I absolutely think that there's definitely at least some
So
something to that.
you kind of say two things. One, you say that it's like an antenna, but at the same time, it's like your recent past. And I guess for me, as I'm trying to wrap my brain around what you're saying, like those are two distinctly separate things for me. Something that restores energy and something that is like waiting for energy to show up to sense energy. You know what I'm saying? Like that's how I see of an antenna, right? An antenna is poking out and it's waiting for a signal, right? To me, that's very different than something like an antenna is not storing any kind of memory.
Well, see, I don't mean storing energy. I think that if you want to put it into a kind of constructive idea, the conductivity, right? And so the way that you've lived has something to do with the way that you can conduct energy with your hair. And so if you have low vibrational thoughts for a long period of time, like 6 months, then 6 months worth of your hair is now going to only conduct low vibrational frequencies because that's all that it's been charged to do. And when I say antenna, I don't necessarily mean antenna to only receive or almost as a communication system, right? Almost, you could say, like our last podcast, tied to your subconscious, right? Your ability, the delivery method, so to speak. Whereas the subconscious is the bank.
So in a way, an antenna is not really a good form because it's more like a
conductor, more like something that can receive
But
charge and
I was getting
deliver
ready-
charge.
something that can send and receive.
Right. Almost like a power line.
What about bald people?
What do you mean?
I mean, these are people that can't grow hair. So does that mean that they're less in tune? Or does it mean that they're less spiritual?
I think it probably has to do with the experiences of the generations before them, right? And so they talk about how your mother's father is the gene that you get baldness from, right? And so my mother's father is still not bald. He's very old. You'd think that he'd be bald by now if he was going to be bald. And
Ain't nobody in our family bald, bro.
right. And
Like
so
on my mom's side, on my dad's side, but on my mom's side, which is the side we're related on,
right. And so
nobody went bald.
right. And
Even
so
Poppy was 70-something years old.
all of our family are also extremely free thinking, a lot, very spiritual. And so you kind of see that now, whereas my stepdad he went bald at like 30-some, he started going bald. He only enjoys the physical pleasures, right? Only the things that he can experience in his body. And so just like your muscles, right, you're going to atrophy. And so over generations and generations of a lack of connection to a higher consciousness, a lack of connection to your inner spirituality, I feel like you probably lose it. I mean, usually you lose it.
That's an interesting. So like you're almost saying that hair is so spiritually entwined that a person that doesn't have hair is evolving without their conductor, without.
Well, they're being
What
separated from.
seems to
you
be
could say separated from God.
in your kind of philosophy, like what seems to be an important conductor.
Absolutely. See, this is something that I practice with my children, my wife, everybody that I go around, I say your hair is an extremely important sacred thing on your body. I've never formulated an entire, strong belief of what that is. However, I have a similar idea about tattoos, about vices. I think that, we all have our vices, and I think that using certain substances here and there. There are obviously trade-offs, and that's part of your human experience. But I think that keeping respecting your vessel as purely as possible is going to be the best way to maintain your connection to whatever you believe.
I really like what you said. You said respecting your vessel.
Yeah, I think that a lot of like a tattoo, a lot of hair decisions, a lot of they know that they can't be undone, right? Like and with hair, it grows back, but I more mean like my buddy Matt, who we were talking about earlier. His son has bleach blonde, snow white hair, and he told me that all of his kids also had that color hair. Well, when they cut it, they lost it. They have brown hair. And so his son, who has never had their haircut and will never have their haircut, he believes will have that for the whole time. And so there are obvious changes that happen when you do those kinds of things. Whether, he keeps that color hair for his whole life or not, I'm not going to speculate on. But, when you make these changes, you know that they're permanent. You just don't care enough in the moment you want to identify with a experience so badly, or a version of your identity so badly, that your human experience can't explain it, right? And so to me, I believe that, I think that there are a lot of cultural norms that we've moved away from because we say that they're old. However, I think that they worked, right?
So the Europeans, and I don't know where this came about, but at some point the Europeans decide that they should have short hair because that's, if you look throughout history, like Europeans decided on short hair. It separated them from the other cultures. I think in many ways, I don't know if this came from the old Roman Empire or whatever, but it was almost like separating the civilized from the barbarian, right? The barbarians were out there living in the woods, doing whatever they did. Druids and mystics or whatever, right? And that's not to say that all Romans necessarily cut their hair, but I think, there's this extension into European culture that comes from Romans that I think this idea of, like, especially military and business people, right? They have short hair and no facial hair, right? And this is very different from, say, a Middle Eastern culture, which is like long hair and a beard.
Right.
There are people in the Middle East and in the steppes they're very keen on having a beard as some of form of status or otherwise. And so I'm just kind of mulling that around as I think about this idea of, hair representing the spirituality, not only of like my personal experience, but also of a people, because, in this kind of, I'm going to call it hypothesis for right now, this theory of yours that, hair is so spiritually intrinsically linked that it actually evolves. I want to say I don't know if I can agree with that or not, but I'm going to run with it. And so if it's this powerful thing, then it's very interesting to look at European culture, who was the Christian culture, the spreading Christianity throughout the world. And yet they're maybe unwittingly, unknowingly, curtailing, containing, or otherwise minimizing their spiritual, what was the word you used for it? Not a conduit.
Conductor? Conductor,
yes. So this conductor. And then if you have these people that are continually cutting their hair, especially men, right? Because again, in almost all cultures, women are maintaining their hair. And so I don't know. I just wanted to kind of throw that in the mix because, there's Christianity through the European lens has been such a powerful influence on the world and has such an impact on the world.
Well, I think I think a lot of that has to do with the perceiver, right? And so this is why civilization has.
Did you say the perceiver or the receiver?
Perceiver, okay. Like the person perceiving, right?
Person
and
perceiving.
So we've practiced some form of propaganda from our very beginning, right? And so you talk about how the cutting of hair and, you know, certain hygiene practices separated the men from the barbarians, right? And so
Civilized from the barbarians. Yeah.
right, and so this is how we've kind of created a binary system of human beings, right? And I think that it's an interesting thing to think about because I don't think that it is intentional, right? Because if it were intentional, and maybe it's more intentional now as we've learned different things and such, but I think in the beginning, like we talked about, it was just a perversion of self, right? It's a perversion of your need to identify with your vanity specifically. How you look is how you value yourself, right? And so I think that, okay, this is the way that I've looked at it, regardless of it being hair, whether it's tattoos, anything. I don't think, personally, I think that your best practice is going to be removing or adding as little to and from your body as possible. I think that, you know, besides the nutrition and need for nourishment, well, and even in some ways, I think that Adam and Eve consuming the apple is almost metaphorical in the sense that maybe humans at one point were conducting energy for themselves almost similarly to plants, where we received energy directly from the universe and we didn't need to consume. However, different idea. But I think that you were born with everything that you need, assuming that the generations before you didn't weaken your connection to source, right? And so, like we talked about with source, right, everything has deities, right? And so every religion has these deities, and the way that I think about these deities are going to be, you know, I think of source as the manifestation of our physical realm, almost like the universe, right? And so that is the actual source. Everything that breaks off of that would then be, the closer that it is to source, would be almost a deity, right? Or a stronger path, because they can harness more of, right? So if we split binarily, we have 50 and 50. We split again binarily. Those are 25, 25, 12.5, 12.5, 12.5, 12.5, right? And so as you go through generations, you take and add things from, you know, whoever is in your lineage. And so obviously I don't think that it's permanent, right? I don't think that if somebody in your family is bald, that you are absolutely destined to be bald, or generations down can't have hair, right? That they can repair their connection. They can utilize their connection to God more, right? Or source, right? But I definitely think that the practice of connecting with source has something to do with the growth of hair. It could even just be related to brain activity. However, yeah, I think that you're born with everything that you need, assuming that your lineage did it right first.
So what about the thousands of monks out there that shave their head? And I would posit that these are pretty spiritual people. I mean, anybody that spends most of their time in some kind of spiritual study, meditation, and contemplation, you know, maybe they're trying to get there, but a lot of them have some pretty wild and wise perceptions and have had extremely spiritual lives.
This is a really interesting topic, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because it's something that I've been formulating a lot too. Because there are obviously spiritual cultures that don't practice hair growth in the same way. Now, we also talked about Eastern versus Western ideology as well. I think last podcast, at least a little bit, we touched on it, right? And so, them being an Eastern spiritual culture, they are stoic in nature, right? They are about the denial of the human experience. They're about the denial of self. You talk about Bruce Lee, there is no self, right? And so your hair is one of your only real unique identifiers, right? Like, your hair, as we've talked about, and at least the way that I believe, is almost like the output for your experiences that you've had over the time, right? And so that connects you to who you are. If there is no idea of self, then why would you be connected to a version of self, right? So every single monk who's shaving their hair, they wake up every day with a new version of themselves because they don't believe that they are a unique individual person. They deny themselves the ability to have a self. They are so directly entwined with who they are spiritually that they don't need to conduct and show. And maybe that goes to say that your connection to source isn't necessarily your hair. Maybe that is your connection to almost history, and source is more of an internal connection. And so maybe the system runs, through your core and out, right? And so, because these people obviously have an extreme connection to source. I mean, I've seen some of these, they practice almost when they're ready to die. They know that they're going to die. They lay down and they leave their bodies, right? And it's a practice, from what I understand. This is something that most monks, once they're at the end of their journey, they just know. They lay down and they're carried to where they're going to be put by all of their other monks. There's no sadness. There's no ability to feel. There's no emotion.
So, well, especially for those that will practice some form of non-attachment as their spiritual path. And I wonder, maybe that's what the hair thing is about, right? They see the hair as a very individualistic thing. Maybe
intimate to yourself.
it's an ego thing, right? Like, they spend their time combing it and taking care of it, more worried about what their hair looks like than they're worried about being a good person. And so I could see that as being a distraction.
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
the ego can be a very big distraction in a spiritual journey. And so if your ego's tied up in your hair, right, then is it doing you any good spiritually or not? You know what I mean?
Well,
in that regard, if it becomes a vanity point.
From what I understand, it's almost anything that could identify you as different is what they get rid of, right? And so you can't look the same as every person, but you can get as close as you can to taking away all of your unique identifiers. And so having your hair is having an attachment to your past, right? Well, and that's definitively true, right? Because you remember a time before you had your hair, and you remember a life at every single stage of having your hair. Your hair gives you a sense of time, right? I mean, you could even calculate time based on hair growth. And so...
Yeah, but there's a lot of people, like, they don't even they might not change their hairstyle for years. You know what I mean? They're not looking at their hair to go, oh, I remember this. I guess to support your point, they may look back in high school and go, damn, I can't believe I wore that hairstyle. You know what I mean?
Right, but I more mean the ability for growth, because it wouldn't be that they would get haircuts then, because they're not thinking of it in a vanity. Like, it's not like they're going bald because they like the way it looks. So it wouldn't be the vanity of the hair. It wouldn't be the, I don't have any vanity in my hair. I don't use my hair to look good whatsoever. My hair is always up or it's down when I sleep. I don't do anything to it. I brush it to make sure that it's not tangled so that I can put it up, and that's it. Like, my hair is not... I try to move away from any sense of vanity as possible, right? Your vanity, I feel like, is the most toxic point of your ego. I think your ego exists and your idea of self, and I think that for some, like monks, I understand moving away from self. Like, absolutely, I understand the ideology of Stoicism, but for me, ego and vanity has nothing to do with it. It's my very spiritual connection to my higher self, right? My representative in the spiritual realm, right? My secondary vessel. And so, yeah, I don't see vanity in my hair. I see vanity in, people who regularly cut their hair and, they go on They have to get their hair cut every 2, 3, 4 weeks. Because I used to be that, and I used to have a lot of vanity in my hair, right?
And there's a lot of people,
Well, most people have
We're not
vanity.
really we're not really speaking about like super spiritual people, but there's a lot of people put vanity in their hair, and
They
and
have
specifically women.
vanity is
And what do you think is the difference between men and women in the spiritual, regarding the spirituality of hair, and women growing their hair versus men growing their hair? Is there a difference?
I think that there's a difference. I think that you could get, for some of the views that I hold, you could get definitely demoralized and deconstructed, and a lot of people could, dog on you for. But I believe that, and I haven't really formulated an idea of belief as far as women connected to source consciousness. I believe that they have a connection to source consciousness, but I believe that men have a different connection to source consciousness, as they are the servants, right? The way that I think about life is that good men suffer. This is something that I talk about a lot with my family. Good men suffer, good men serve. And so if you're a good husband, you serve. You aren't the king of the house because you say that you're the king of the house. You're the king of your castle when you have built the castle, right? You have served and earned the loyalty of your family. You have done everything that you could to go without so that the people that you care about don't have to. And so I believe that men are, at least in a spiritual sense, I would consider men servants of God, whereas I would consider women the fruit of that labor, right? In every culture and almost every species, the males compete with the males to keep the females safe. Even lions, where females are the primary hunters, they're not facing predators or danger when they hunt, right? They're attacking something that they know that they have the predatorial edge over. Whereas if a male walked into the pride, there isn't going to be one female fighting the male, and the only job of the male lion then is to protect the cubs and the women, right? And so this is, to me, a very analyzable, definitive truth that the most respected men are the ones that can serve the best. And so I believe that people who have a higher spiritual connection are people who serve source the best, serve God the best, right? And so that's why you see in every religious culture, they're helping the weak, right? You're serving the weak. You're responsible for serving the weak. Like the church that I used to go to, they fed everybody every single night for dinner. They gave housing to homeless people. We did projects where we gave toiletries to homeless people, things like that. I believe that the stronger connection that you have to God, the more of a servant of God that you are, not the more deity-like you are. And I think that's a huge thing that we mix up with Jesus and such as well, is we idolize him as a king and not as a servant who, almost like a god of we need to respect, versus someone who is serving God and the people.
I want to back up a little bit because
I spew off a lot of stuff sometimes.
that's all right, and there's some, I want to kind of keep it a little bit on track and keep it focused kind of on this question of men and women for a minute. So I want to go back to that because for me, I come from a perspective that I don't have such a male-focused perspective as you do. I think that men and women are both servants of God because we're both creatures here and we're both doing it. I think that the masculine energy and the feminine energy are all part of one spectrum, and you need both of them. You need both of them for the family. I oftentimes think of the woman as being a servant too, right? And it's a very Christian kind of thing. Everybody's a servant, so to speak, including Jesus, is oftentimes been represented as a servant. And there's oftentimes where you'll hear things like a servant's heart. And so in that respect, I think, especially in older times when our ability to gather and store resources, we're a little bit more dependent on our strengths as men. And the division of labor within the family was divided depending on the strengths and weaknesses of the people participating.
I want to circle back to that whenever you're finished.
But I don't feel that women are less spiritual than men. I don't feel that. I don't personally. I would agree with the people that would say that sometimes some of these things are just human constructs. They're based on nature, but that doesn't mean. And maybe they were valid for a period of time, but that doesn't mean that they're right. Just because my grandparents did things a certain way doesn't mean that they're right. I can honor their tradition and honor their memory by doing that, but that doesn't mean that it's right. And there's also a thing for me that it depends on the context and how society structures itself is oftentimes based on that context. Now we're all coming out of a tribal context and a hunter-gatherer, and we've got a struggle to survive context. And so the division of labor in that context was such that the men had the strength and the power to build the castle. But we're getting into a period of time with business and multitasking and data and remembering things that, in education that's needed. Like our current context in many ways is moving towards a more feminine strength model. The ability to multitask, the lack of need for brute strength in order to gain resources. I mean, that's part of what we're experiencing right now with the kind of attack of anything masculine as toxic and things like that. And so, anyway, I want to go back to women tend to be, in all cultures, the ones that grow their hair the longest. And if we're using this idea that hair is therefore what's the word? Conductor of this spiritual energy.
As well as product of history, right? It's almost like in some ways if you're reading the vibrational conductibility, I guess. I don't know exactly how you could measure, because I don't know exactly the way that they measure it with this photography, but you could map out the way that your life has gone over the last amount of time that you've had your hair, right? And so...
But let me kind of finish my thought, because I wanted to relate it to, if I'm going on to your thing that people with hair are more spiritual, and if we're going on the idea that your ancestors can be so less spiritual that you actually lose your hair in part of an evolutionary process, then if the hair is that important, then it would seem to me that women would be the more spiritual of the creatures.
Absolutely. I think that I think that what I'm saying is getting a little bit understood. So to preface, I have a traditional aspect of belief in the idea that I believe that men are responsible for the things for suffering, right? I believe that males are bottom tier individuals of a sexual hierarchy, right? I believe that the men who accrue the most stress, the most pain, are the ones that are the most respected. And it's at least mostly true, right? At least in an aspect of maybe not totally finances, but if you're out in the woods, you're camping with a bunch of friends, you got 10 of you, right? 5 guys. The women are going to respect and sleep in the same tent of the person who was able to build the tent, right? They had to do the work they had to suffer through learning how to do that specific thing to get the respect and the recognition for that specific thing. And
I gotta push back on that, because that's not true. Most women are going to sleep in the tent that the king told them to sleep in, and the guy that built the tent is sleeping in the tent that the king told him to sleep in. The one that's getting the respect is not the one building the tent; it's the one telling people to build the tent.
I definitely don't believe that.
What do you mean?
So,
Like we're looking
so
at if we look at history,
how did the king get to where the king is?
probably because his mom and dad fucking built up a kingdom
Right,
for it.
right. If you want to go off of lineage and corruption, I mean,
Well,
obviously corruption and lineage exists, but I'm saying from a group of individuals, one will become a leader organically.
Yeah,
It
but we're
will
not talking. We
because-
don't live in a vacuum, bro.
Well,
We
in
live
this
in a real
situation, it was
world.
vacuum. There's 10 people in the woods
Yeah.
with a tent. So the leader is going to be the one who can do the most.
And I still disagree with it. The leader is going to be the one that organizes the most and the one that's able to delegate the responsibilities.
Right, but that's
And-
still doing the most because he still has to understand the job.
He's not.
He still has to understand everybody's strengths and weaknesses. He still understands the process that it takes to do those things, or else he wouldn't understand the skills of those people.
When a rich kid like Donald Trump goes out, nobody gives a fuck about how he made his money. Nobody gives a fuck about who's building his tent. The tent has his name on it. They respect him, and they're going to his bedroom. That's my point. To me,
Right, but
the
that's not
idea
him
of
living his
the idea
legacy either.
the idea that it's just the strongest one that can physically do things is the one that the women
I
are
don't
going to
necessarily
follow.
mean physically either.
I don't.
I think
Because you said the one that built the tent, and I'm like, no, the one that's putting the tent together is not the one that the women are sleeping with. He is a tool for some other person with more power.
Well, in this scenario, he's not though. There are 5 free individuals camping, and 5 free individual men, 5 free individual women. If 4 of them cannot put the tent together, then they will all sleep in the one man's tent who could, which gives him the respect and recognition of being the only person that could provide safety and housing. And so, because of that, I believe that the best way to become a good man is to suffer and learn and experience as much as possible so that the people that you love don't have to suffer and experience. I believe that the feminine nature of spirituality is that of when you suffer, you gain a pessimistic view of certain things, right? You think what we would call logically, right? And so you see this in women who have been burned, right? Women who pick bad partners who cannot provide for them, or maybe they're providing for themselves, but there's some kind of hardship within the relationship. You see that they become extremely negative, pessimistic, extremely quickly, extremely easily. Their purity is their purity of mind. I mean, their state of mind. Mental health is tarnished very easily then. And so my point is that the feminine spiritual nature is that of caring for young, creating whole communities, homemaking, right? And so this isn't from a point of suffrage or pilgrimage. It's just as important, if not more important, right? And this is why I say the men are at the bottom tier of what I think the hierarchy of society should be, children being the top of children of, well, I guess female children being the top, male children at a certain age being, recognized as suffering males as well. But the way that I perceive femininity in spirituality is the responsibility of raising good individuals, right? And so, like you said earlier, this is divided up in skills. My wife hasn't worked since she turned 18. She had a horrible experience working at a nursing home. She was an STNA, and even though she requested to be moved because the job was too laborious for her to do while she was pregnant, they still made her do it, and she had a miscarriage, and so I never made her go back to work. Well, I guess it never made, but I relieved her of the responsibility to need to provide income so that she could take the time to mourn. And what we realize is that our children are a lot healthier, a lot more intelligent, a lot more happy, a lot more mentally strong. I also work from home, and so I do believe that the father has an extreme important role to play in the family. But I also believe that is of an authoritarian nature in most aspects. I believe that the father should be the one who challenges children. They aren't as active in nature, at least most of the time. I think there are men who cook every meal and whatever. I'm not judging anybody based on their specific decisions. I'm saying that the way that I live is very traditionally, in the fact that I respect my wife and I don't think that my wife should have to suffer. I believe that I should accrue all of the suffrage that my family is going to bear, so that, and evenly divide that among the men that I produce, because I believe that it is the responsibility of men to be the barrier of traumatic experience, danger, pain, suffering, and I believe that because of that, men have to work harder for their connection to God as well. This is what we're talking about with pilgrimage, right? You have to reset. You have to have a much purer level state of mind, because you aren't given, and this goes back to the civilized value, right? Men don't have value until they provide something, right? Men are the only people. They talk about dog, women, and children only having. This is something that what's his name said? What's that comedian? The zebra from Madagascar. Chris Rock. Chris Rock said this on stage. He said, dogs, women, and children are the only people who are born with intrinsic value. And I don't necessarily know if I believe that to be true, but I live my life as if that's true, just like I live my life as if God exists, whether God exists or not. And so,
I definitely would agree with Chris that men are not valued unless they're producing something, like
absolutely,
in society, and women. I mean, I think that there's just to clarify, like, you say you're going to bear all the suffering, but you're not going to bear the suffering of childbirth.
Right, absolutely. I mean, the suffering that I can bear, everything that I can bear, all of the responsibility that I can bear.
But what I'm trying to bring about is that there's an equality, there's an equalness there.
Absolutely.
The suffering may be different. The spirituality may be different. The masculinity versus femininity may be different. How those affect the roles in the family and what each person adds to the family are different. And I think that there are a lot of things that are based on context of when we use words like traditional, that are based on a different set of survival needs. Now, I think there's a lot of value to them. As you mentioned, your family has a lot of value because your children are getting attention. They're not getting a child that only gets attention for a couple hours each night of two stressed out parents who have been at work all day is vastly different than the attention that a parent can give if they're able to stay at home and focus on the kids all day.
Yeah,
without focusing on
my children being taught by my wife, being taught the things that I want them to learn, being taken care of the way that I want them taken care of, not giving that responsibility to anyone else.
But I think in today's modern, let me finish what I'm saying. I think in today's modern context, that could easily be switched. It could easily, other than the breastfeeding and actually giving birth, if the woman was the breadwinner and the man stayed at home, I think that there would be just as much value. And I think we live in a context where that's much more possible. I know it is, because there's thousands and millions of women that are doing it all by themselves anyway, right? Now, how effective are they doing it? The truth is like the statistics point out that women, the children who are raised in single mother homes have more obesity, more mental health issues. They're more
30% more likely to live in poverty, 30% more likely to be in the criminal justice system, 30% more likely to be in the welfare system.
Yeah,
I just had this conversation with my buddy yesterday.
Fair enough. But I still think that we live in a modern context where I think those roles are adjustable. I think that's one thing that we're experiencing with the whole LGBTQ alphabet soup, in the idea that there's separation between our biology and our socially constructed roles. I think there's danger in separating the two completely and saying they don't exist. But when I go to spirituality, I look at things I don't look at, okay, you have 5 M&Ms, that means I get 5 M&Ms. I look at things like she suffers childbirth, she suffers the periods. In your context, you suffer the pains of labor to earn money, to deal with the dangers, the threats. You know, we can go as simple as killing the bugs, right? Like there are a
Right.
lot of women out there like, I love my husband because he kills all the bugs.
I love what you're saying because it proves most of what I'm saying. I think we probably think very similarly on this specific issue as well. But let's roll back to the mother and father can play the same roles kind of thing, right? I'm not going to tell somebody that they need to live the way that I live, right? But like we discussed, so you talked about the dad being the stay-at-home parent, the mother being the breadwinner, right? Statistically showing, let's just take it from a very basic standpoint. I believe in certain cases where women want to be ultra competitive and compete at the highest levels of economy, of athletics, whatever. I totally believe that is totally fine. I watch female MMA fighters. I have a favorite female MMA fighter. I believe that women should be in government. I don't have any idea based on that, right? But I believe that the most valuable and most rewarding experience that a woman will have in her life is bearing and raising a child. You see a lot of problems with birth, right? You see a lot of post-traumatic stress. You see, what is it called?
Postpartum depression.
Postpartum depression, yeah. And all of these things are statistically proven to be, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know they're quite large in the area where women practice the way that our bodies were biologically designed to care for children, right? So having a natural birth, which is a stressful, traumatic experience that is rewarded by a child who you feed from your breast, which is a reward in itself because you see your child grow as healthily as possible with very little sickness, very little, your body is delivering them exactly what they need whenever they need it. The vitamins, the nutrients change as their saliva is producing and conversing with your biology, right? And so in a generalized sense, where women want to have children, women don't want to have to work, women want to, they want to work on making their home. In a very general sense, I believe that a woman's value is not based on what she can produce financially. I don't think that there is any value in producing financially. I think that producing financially is something of personal vendetta, the way that you feel and the way that your experiences have gone, and your recognition of systems, your recognition of your experience and how you interpret it. However, as you said, single men, we'll go to the single parent thing, single men actually are 40% less likely to be stricken with poverty, and the numbers for the judicial system, for the children running through in the welfare system are much lower. Now, why do you think that is? Well, it's usually because they're coming from a place of hardship anyways, and so they're so authoritarian that they understand the need for suffrage, and so they make their children suffer because they don't have an emotional attachment to their children. Now, this creates normally resentment of some type, or maybe it creates strong people who do have a good connection with their fathers, but you'll see resentment in a lot of it, or idea of abuse in a lot of it. Single mothers raising especially boys, you'll see terrible men who screw over women, who leave women to be single mothers, who can't provide the things that a husband should be able to provide. You see a chaotic family structure. You see lots of drug abuse, lots of neglect. And so, generally speaking, the male fills an authoritarian role. Learning happens in a lot of ways due to suffering and being a very anxious individual, and however, a lot of learning also comes from an emotional attachment. almost all at a very early age, right? When you're up to 5 years old, you're in theta, and so the feelings that you feel are going to construct the way that you feel feelings for the rest of your life. And when I say theta, because you didn't totally understand what I was saying, theta is a frequency that your brain acts on in the morning and as you're young. I forget what it's called. I think we work on alpha frequency now, but it's theta when you're a young child and when you first wake up in the morning.
It's like a receptive state.
Yeah,
Can
it's
you
the
describe it?
programmable state of mind. That's why they say don't get on your phone in the morning, because you'll see something that will change how you feel about the rest of the day, right? And so without the mother being the full-time parent, I might add, especially of young children, they don't learn emotional strength. They don't learn the ability to, because when I'm talking to my children and I discipline my children, I have no thought or care about how they feel. I'm not asking them to regulate their emotion. I'm asking them to regulate their behavior. And so my wife teaches them to regulate their emotion. My wife will explain the reason that I do things, because for me, my job isn't to care about how everybody is feeling within the moment, which obviously, as I said, single parents, especially of women, will create extremely dependent females who have traumatic trauma from related to men, and that's why they say daddy issues kind of stuff. It's usually because men don't think about feelings, because men need results. And this is why both sides are extremely important. Femininity and masculinity are both equally as important. And that's why I believe that we have specific roles, and we always have. We're in a very short period of time where we're acting like it can change. And the Romans did the same thing right before they fell. I like to talk about New Rome, especially. I call America New Rome sometimes about, especially with the LGBTQ stuff. Not that I care about what anybody does in their freedom, but legislating specific things. And the way that our government is going now is very similar to the fall of Rome, losing the idea of identifying with sexual norms, with the way that we handle sexual or roles based on gender. Like I said, I don't care what anybody does in their freedom, but legislating, like Jordan Peterson says, legislating certain speech or legislating certain activity in public eye, I believe is the real harm. I have nothing against anybody who wants to identify as whatever they want to, who wants to tell me what their pronouns are, who wants to get any kind of surgery, get anything removed, say that they don't want to be either gender anymore so they can't reproduce in any form or fashion. I have no problem with that as the individual. Now, I think that creating a trend in media by slowly programming it into your mind that it's an option that you should pursue, because if you don't, then there's something wrong with you. I think that's extremely damaging, and I believe that that's exactly why Rome fell. And I also believe it had something to do with the Greek military as well. In Greece, they practiced homosexuality as a form of induction into their military. You weren't a warrior until you practiced, or until someone else practiced a homosexual act on you.
I heard that that's just what some people did. That you always had a mentor, and a lot of times this mentor would, they may turn their mentee
Inseminate you.
But anyway, to go back to the hair, the spirituality aspect of men and women, if we can just try to pull it back for a couple minutes to the hair, spirituality of hair.
Absolutely.
And the spirituality of culture where both men and women grow long hair. I guess coming from a Western kind of perspective, like I've always seen long hair as a very feminine thing. I know that there's some Native American in us, but it's not a big part of our culture. It may be part of our DNA, but
Right.
It's not really a big part of our culture. And so I guess I'm just trying to play with this idea that the idea that you kind of expressed, this idea that okay, long hair creates more in tuneness with the spiritual world, and at least in the Western world, that would have to be women. And if we're getting our hair genes, at least the baldness genes, from our mother's, our mitochondrial side, like what does that say about the spirituality of Western men versus the spirituality of Western women? And how does that compare to the spirituality of men from other cultures that grow their hair?
You know, that's a really interesting idea. That's such an interesting idea. Something that I always talk about is the men are responsible for the vessel of consciousness, and the women are responsible for consciousness, right? When you look at sperm, you can eject someone's entire nervous system, and it almost mirrors directly what a single sperm cell looks like exactly, right? But in this specific case, when you're talking about women, and I mean, women are just genetically gifted in the ability to grow hair as well. Women automatically have longer hair than most men, and most men have a cap on their genetic ability to grow hair, right? And so more women will be able to grow longer hair faster than most men, which I believe is an absolute definitive fact. However,
I don't, but go ahead. I don't know where you get your information from.
well, statistically, I mean, I believe the rate of growth can be faster for men. Like my hair grows faster than my wife's, but the length the length of which my hair can grow is, for men, can be capped, whereas women, from what I understand, well, and I don't have any definitive details, but I've seen women with hair down to the ground, down to their heels. I mean, the person with the longest hair in the world is a woman with 20-foot hair. I believe that if a man could grow hair that long, then there would be a competitor within that record, but I don't know of any.
I mean, I'm sure there's a guy that might have it and then short. And I know that I've definitely, like I said, first of all, there's not a lot of cultures where men are going to grow their hair that long because it's a cultural thing. Again, I think that oftentimes we see long hair as feminine. So a guy taking care of his hair that much, especially in previous cultures where any kind of femininity would be frowned upon in the status of men, especially in the locker room, so to speak.
Well, and see, that probably has a lot to do with it as well.
And so
the upkeep or the care.
But right? I don't think there's any. I think if I wanted to grow my hair, and if I just kept on growing it, and I kept it trimmed, and I kept getting it cleaned up and split ends and all that, that eventually it'd grow down to my heels too. It just might take me a long ass time, and it might be challenging because if I don't take care of it good enough, it's going to crack and split, and that's going to cap it.
Well, and that's probably due to the masculine energy, and that probably is what more likely is.
Or just not knowing how to take care of it, right? Like women are going to.
Well, we don't necessarily have the care. They may sit around either.
Brushing each other's hair.
Yeah, women care about loving themselves a lot more than men do, right?
Yeah.
Doing the things to take care of themselves. But back to what I was saying, maybe the idea, there's an argument to be made that women are the only people that can endow a vessel with consciousness, right? And so I always loved being able to say that the nervous system was of me, right? Because that's my whole joke, right? I mean, obviously not, but the genetic material and the similarity between sperm and nervous system, it just looks like that's what I can say. So I joke about that all the time. But now there's an argument that you proposed that could be made that the only person that can endow somebody with a spiritual consciousness, with a piece of source consciousness, is females. And so if that's the case, that's why your connection to higher self, your connection to your higher self is related.
When you say endow a person with spiritual, what do you mean by that?
Well, I don't necessarily believe that if we were able to reconstruct human DNA ourselves, that we would have the same level of consciousness. I'm not saying artificially impregnate an egg that exists of a person that we've had that exists. I'm not saying that. That's genetic material that exists. I'm talking about we construct our own version of human DNA that is maybe even almost identical in every way. We even control the identifiers so we can give them their specific traits, whatever. I don't believe that they will have the same level of consciousness as a human being that is of the lineage of people who've existed on the planet as human beings. And so I don't
Is that
believe,
because we just have more history?
well, I think it has to do with a lot of stuff. I think it has to do with our experiences and
So
our
well, let me ask you this:
our lineage
if
of
we
connection.
could, so is if I say if we could clone me, is that different than what you're saying, as far as creating?
That's
DNA?
absolutely different. Yeah, because
Okay.
cloning you would be.
So
I
it
mean,
would
you're
be-
still it.
So let me
You could probably even have the same
let me
memories.
jump to this. Let me jump to this. Then. If we could create a DNA sequence that actually created human-like beings, right, that are biological beings, these aren't robotic beings, right? We could create that type of DNA, and if we had an island that we could throw them on for, let's say, 5, 6, 20 generations, do you think that over that time they would develop any kind of spirituality?
I think
on
that
their-
spirituality is directly related to the very natural human being. I believe that the most spiritual beings, I don't believe that spirituality is something that you even have to work towards. I think that spirituality comes of you doing the things that you should be doing already.
Well,
And
but
so
what
those
I'm getting
people
at,
on that
I'm
island-
I'm trying to work with this other concept that you have, that one sex over the other can endow spirituality into other vessels,
Right.
right? And part of your part of your thesis, your argument is that if we created our own version of DNA, that it would lack spirituality.
So you're saying, okay, so you're saying that if we created a person,
Yeah. With
we'll
call it synthetic
we created
DNA.
a bunch of synthetic versions of humans and put them on an island. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, what I'm saying is if and then you let it go for 20 centuries.
No,
Like,
no.
you
I
don't
think that
think
would
that
become
they
a
would-
completely different species. And I don't mean, well,
Hold on,
and
hold on.
that's,
I don't care about another
that's-
species. Would they develop a spirituality?
Well, that's
would
not-
they tap it? Would they be part of
the
and
consciousness,
access to
the
yes.
source consciousness. I don't believe that they would be endowed with any direct level of consciousness. I believe that if you were to create absolutely authentic DNA that had no trace of an actual human, you were able to completely construct authentic synthetic DNA. I don't believe that I don't believe that there's anything to put into the vessel. Like, being put into your vessel is a process. And that process probably happens over the 9-10 months of you being constructed within the womb.
Well, and one of the reasons why I include 10 to 20 generations is I think our spirituality is taught to us in many ways. We learn
Through our
from previous
experiences.
generations.
Yeah, through our experiences. But
Right, like so
I don't
the
believe that
original
these people
man
can
didn't have
reproduce,
this,
is what I'm
didn't
saying.
have the same spirituality that we do.
Right, absolutely.
Neanderthals didn't have the same spirituality.
Absolutely.
And maybe they did, they just couldn't articulate it.
Right, because all of it comes from the same central belief that there has to be something else.
I'm really kind of working around to this idea that, first of all, to try to understand what you mean by endow spirituality into a vessel.
Consciousness.
Okay, so endow consciousness. So
This
you're
is
saying,
what I mean. I don't believe that you could put these synthetic people on an island because I don't think that they would have the ability to make decisions.
They wouldn't have any kind of consciousness?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what of us is biologically written into us and what of us is...
Well, they're going to make decisions because they're going to survive. If they're going to survive,
well, who
more
knows if
than
they're
one-
going to survive, though, is what I'm saying.
And part of my thing is that it's if you create a thing that's viable enough to be a synthetic human, then it's going to be viable enough to reproduce. And if and then that's why I included.
I'm
in
not
my
making
thing.
the argument that it wouldn't be biologically possible for them to reproduce, right? That's not what I'm arguing. I'm arguing how much of our consciousness is responsible for the processes within our body, how much of our consciousness is responsible
What
for
I'm
making
trying to
choices.
figure out is what you mean by endow consciousness into another vessel. Like, that's what I'm trying to understand, and what I'm using your thing about this synthetic that it cannot to help me understand what you
Right.
mean by consciousness. I'm trying to use what you're saying to help me
Right, but that's what I'm
understand
saying.
what you're saying.
These synthetic people, I don't know, could even make decisions, could formulate thoughts, because how do you formulate thoughts without
Well, if you've got a
consciousness?
DNA that replicates humans, they're obviously, like, we can create DNA that replicates animals, and they got some kind of consciousness.
Have we? Have we completely from total scratch constructed our own
I mean,
genetics?
I don't know if that. I
I
don't
think
know
there's
that.
there is
Cloned.
one.
I don't know.
I think
I don't know how much different creating from scratch is going to be that much different from a clone. I mean, if we're talking about if it's DNA enough that it's going to create a body that looks like this and a walking, talking humanoid, then these humans are going to be. I mean, we don't even need biological DNA, and we can create machines that are able to do these things. And maybe they're really far behind, but they're developing consciousness, right? They're developing some kind of awareness that they are part of a larger system. And I mean, I think recently I heard, like, oh, it was Google or Apple, one of them, their kind of AI went off the rockers, and they're like, oh shit.
Oh, that I don't know if that's true. They're saying that it can, that it's
But
conscious.
that's part
like
of
a
the fear,
7-year-old
right?
kid
Is
or
that
something, yeah.
that's part of the fear is that it will become some kind of sentient being, and I guess that's where I'm at. Is I'm trying to understand. For one, I'm trying to understand why you think that one sex, biological sex, can endow consciousness into another vessel. And part of what I'm trying to understand is what you mean by that when you say that one sex can endow consciousness into another vessel. I'm trying to
This
understand.
was going off of your idea originally, where you said that women grow longer hair. What I mean is that their lineage is directly, they are receiving spiritual value from the very beginning, right? And so this goes back to what I was saying earlier in response to what you were saying, and I kind of don't fully remember how I formulated the idea anyways, but it was in reaction to what you had said. And so I said that there's an argument to be made that because of the female lineage and because of the spiritual connection that they have to source, right? Because it's very different than a masculine connection, as we discussed. I would argue a stronger connection. Because of that, the process is given to them because they can maintain a stronger connection to source, which allows the vessel to be endowed with a portion of source consciousness, which is what I believe that we all are. Our consciousness comes from source consciousness. I don't believe that someone in a lab could endow a piece of I think we've constructed one piece of bacterial organism genetics that are completely authentic, have never existed before, and we had to program it. We had to program it with the knowledge of what it was to do, right? We had to program it with its mission, right? I don't believe that we can program a human vessel that has no activity of consciousness with its mission without our data bank of human existence, what gives us our human nature, what gives us our need to know that we're hungry, our crying, our blinking, those things exist definitively somewhere, and we cannot tap into those things. That's why AI isn't where human beings are, and why the fear of AI becoming intelligent that's not the fear. The fear is them. Well, it's not, the fear of it isn't them becoming sentient. It's actually the opposite. That they won't become sentient and that they will make a decision based on the limited information that they have about humans, saying that humans do all this definitively bad stuff that they can calculate in a binary system that says, well, then humans need to go. Whereas another human being would never say, well, all humans need to stop existing, because we understand that it's not a binary thing like that, which is something in us that is human.
When you say someone can endow someone else with consciousness, and you say only one sex can do that, what is it that one sex can do that the other one cannot, that helps me understand what you're saying?
I'm not saying that they're actively doing it, right? I'm saying that the consciousness that will be put into the vessel of that child has to pass through something. And obviously, the vessel that will be carrying that child will have to conduct.
Well, I'm
that.
coming from a place where it comes from whoever's around that child. There's nature and nurture. So whoever's nurturing that child and also whoever's part of the nature of that child are all going to be part of this. So it takes the masculine and the feminine in order to endow consciousness.
Do you not believe that you,
a
as
man
an
can't do it by himself, and a woman cannot do it? We cannot create life.
Right, that's not what I'm saying. This isn't what I'm saying. So I'm saying that the genetic material.
To me, if you're alive, you have some kind of consciousness, regardless of what level you're on. I don't care if you're Neanderthal or you're a fish. You have some sort of consciousness.
Naturally, yeah, they do.
Right. Whether it exists naturally or not, if it's a sentient, if it's conscious, if it's living, breathing.
That's what you're saying. If though
it has consciousness. Well, I mean, I'm going to say that plants have consciousness.
I believe that plants have consciousness as well.
And so I'm really going back to this question, this statement of one sex can endow versus the other one cannot.
Do you not believe that you are endowed with your own version of consciousness that is unique of everyone else, based on your experiences as well as the experience of the lineage of your family?
My perception is yes.
Okay, and so
my consciousness is it has its limits or whatever, but if we're talking about source consciousness, my access to it is and my awareness of it is my own perception. Absolutely. Based on my experiences and
the experiences
lessons
of your
and
lineage.
what I've been taught and how.
Right.
But to me, that comes from both the masculine and feminine of my lineage and of my nurture.
Right. But what I'm saying is that your consciousness is not tied to your biology. So your life is not your consciousness. The essence of who you are, your ability to construct thought, your computing power, that is your consciousness, your self, essence.
I can't do that if I'm not alive.
But you can be alive without having that. That's my point. My point isn't that, the point with the synthetic people is that they would have never gone through a process endowing them with consciousness. Because these are completely artificial, never to be existed. They will have to be programmed to have you're still programmed with a version of consciousness. You're born being nurtured a certain way, given certain experiences which allow you to use certain traits, as well as from your lineage. Obviously, we get natural, what do they call it? There are things that we just do, like how giraffes will be born and just get up and walk. That isn't something that they had to think about. It's something that they just did. And that is their very early stage of consciousness. Everything after that is nurture. You are constructing your reality, right? But you are born of consciousness as a small piece of the lineage that you are produced from. Just like with bees, for instance. Females can create drones at any point in time without another male, and the drones are used as the sperm to create the worker bees, which are females. Now, at any point in time, they can detach themselves and create a small portion of their consciousness to do a very simple, specific job, and they almost have no other use besides keeping the hive warm in the winter and creating female worker bees, right? So, why is it that a queen bee can endow that organism with consciousness without ever being inseminated, without a male existing? Anything. I'm separating genetics from consciousness is why I think you're not understanding.
Well, and that's part of what I'm not understanding. And then you say, well, a female can create life without a male.
I don't mean the life.
But then you say that is creating. She's splitting off her consciousness, and that's the connection that.
That's the connection that we
well,
were
I mean,
about.
there's this connection between life and consciousness, and while I agree that there are people that are living vegetables that aren't conscious, or at least, but I'm even going to say this: if they're alive, there is some sort of consciousness. Whether it's perceived the same way that I do it, whether it's at a high level, low level, or whatever, but if it's alive, it's part of the source consciousness and therefore has its own consciousness. whether it's a tree, a bee, or a fucking me, you know?
I don't believe in consciousness as being held in I believe in consciousness as an energy, like a thought, like
Right.
And
I would agree.
If you're completely brain dead, you are no longer conscious. If they can never bring you back, if your consciousness can never be saved, then you are no longer conscious.
Well, if a doctor says somebody's brain dead, do we know that there's not a little bit of something in there that's processing what's going on?
I mean, I do believe that there's
to me
enough corruption in the medical industry that it could be overturned. But I'm saying that, okay, explain to me then how they would develop consciousness by creating something that has never existed before in reality ever. How would it know how would it at all, the vessel itself with nothing in it, how does that vessel do anything?
The same way that the amoeba that crawled up on the beach and became a fucking turtle, and the same thing that Charles Darwin talked about from the beginning of time, these one cell organisms had their own consciousness.
Yeah.
And they became multi-celled organisms, and they moved on and they developed more consciousness, and they became more aware because they were able to process more information, and that they were taught and shared not only by nature but also nurture. And that over time we have developed the consciousness that we have now. 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000, 4,000, let's go back to prehistory, and Cro-Magnon and Neanderthals. They had a consciousness.
Absolutely.
It was different than our own.
It was
but that was part of the
version
evolution of the
Okay, so what I'm saying
and
is
so
that
that's why I gave the example earlier of if we create the synthetic thing, we put it on an island and we let it survive, assuming it will survive more than one generation, it will develop a consciousness. It will develop awareness of its surroundings and what it's doing, just like a finch in the Galapagos, right? It may not be to the level of humans, but it's going to have a consciousness.
I think we're still getting hung up on a piece of the argument, right? So, amoeba, you talked about amoeba. Amoeba cannot hear, smell, taste, feel. And so you are giving something.
You're making that assumption? It has no senses?
I'm saying that its senses are much more limited than human beings. We've developed our senses because our consciousness has grown with our genetics. So placing a very
evolution, right?
Yes,
over evolutionary period.
Our genetics have also changed. Our ability to do certain things also changed. So it was small growth in genetics, and then the consciousness filled the gap, right? We developed areas of consciousness based on what we could do. So now we can see, okay, we're going to learn how to use sight to our advantage. Well, something that doesn't even understand that it has those abilities ever, it didn't go through cycles of, well, now this is how I digest things, or now I have the ability to reproduce, so this is how I reproduce. Something that is so limited in consciousness would not be able to even lift a finger on the body of something so complex as a human being. A human being's consciousness is so complex because of the time that we've spent at lower levels of capability. So, like AI, it's only become as good as it is now because we've had the tiny iterations. We have had that time to iterate through the levels of AI. The difference here is that you would have to endow it with human consciousness or nothing, because if you put a dog's consciousness into a human, they're not going to be able to do things as a human. They will not be able to survive because you've taken a dog, a consciousness that is formatted to control the vessel of a dog, a canine vessel, and you've moved it now to the vessel of a human being.
So you're saying that humans are the only conscious beings?
That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that the consciousness of the dog has.
Part of my thing is you're saying these things won't develop it, and what I'm saying is
it's taken us millions of years to do that.
Yes,
and it has taken us iterations of genetics.
And I'm saying that you could do the same thing, like whatever it is. If a dog is conscious, regardless of the conscious level, that amoeba was conscious in some sort of way. It realizes that it needs to intake energy and move and do things. Right? And over time, it realizes the intelligence of, I can become a multi-cell organism, and I can grow into this organism. That's consciousness to me.
Yes, but that level of consciousness, that decision that it had to make, is what over the 365 million whatever years
Sure.
that we have existed.
Sure.
We went through 360 million different iterations. And so if we took this one and dropped it here, it's not going to go forward anymore because it skipped all of that. It didn't learn all of that. So what I'm saying is that if you place the consciousness of a single cell organism that is not as complex as a human being into the body of a human being, it will never learn how to use those things because it was never faced with the challenges to learn why those things exist, to stimulate those things, to overcome those problems. It doesn't even have the ability to awake the human mind. Like, our mind is an organ, our brain is an organ. It's what we use to compute things. It's because we can charge it and we can
You ever
move
read
electricity.
Frankenstein? You ever read the book
I didn't
Frankenstein?
read the book,
by
no.
Mary Shelley?
No.
Because it kind of comes from that same argument, right? It comes from this argument is, can Dr. Vishaga, or whatever the fuck his name is.
His
I'm
name
sorry,
is Dr.
it is
Frankenstein.
Dr. Frankenstein, because Frankenstein is not the monster.
It's Frankenstein's monster.
But Dr. Frankenstein creates this thing, right? And it's the same idea. I understand it's not perfect. It's not just this perfectly made thing that's not a clone that we've somehow synthetically made, and therefore it fits into your example only because it has all these restrictions on life. But the fact of the matter is if you create something that is alive, it is going to have a consciousness. Now, I understand what you're saying about you can skip all this time, but part of what we're doing is if a human is making it synthetically, we're using what we have now and what we know about our own DNA to make this thing in this place. We're not taking something from up here and putting it up here. We're taking something from up here and putting it right there.
Right, but we can't create consciousness. That's my argument.
And what my argument is I disagree, and I'm trying to understand where you're at so that I can better understand what you're saying. Specifically, it goes back to hair and why one sex would have the ability to endow over the other. I disagree with that as well. I don't think that it matters if it's male or female. I think that consciousness needs both. I think that we live in a spectrum world and you need the positive and the negative. And therefore, to say that only one can do it versus only the other, I think is a fallacy and I think it's folly. And I'm trying to understand that so then I can then discuss my perspective and how I see it. But, excuse me, because ultimately, like, you can't create, you cannot have consciousness. I don't think consciousness can be limited to human perception, number one. I don't think human consciousness is the ultimate level of consciousness, nor do I think that it's any better necessarily than a lion's consciousness or a turtle's consciousness. And so, in that regard, the idea that we cannot, so there's these two kind of conflicting things going on for me with your argument. And that is, in one point you say only one sex can endow consciousness into another being, but yet we cannot endow consciousness into other beings. That's kind of how I feel like you're saying it.
Okay.
Like these other living
I'll
things.
explain it a little bit better. I don't believe that a human being or any person individually can create consciousness, can move consciousness, can endow anything with consciousness. I believe that consciousness is of God. I believe that it is of our source consciousness. I believe that nothing can be consciousness without the source consciousness. And so if we create it, it is not of the source consciousness. What I'm saying is that that you are endowed with consciousness during the process of pregnancy. And so only females can do that.
Hold on. Please. The reason why I'm saying hold on is earlier you said that we can create AI that will generate consciousness.
No, that's not what I said. I said that it won't become sentient. I said that the fear of it is that it will become, the fear of it is that it will not become sentient, and that based on the information that is available to it, which is the internet, the media, that humans are terrible and so we will need to wipe out human beings. That is not sentient, that's not conscious. Conscious is a human being able to say, or a dog being able to say, yes, lots of them do terrible things. However, we still need to exist because we have a mission. And so I actually said the opposite, that AI will never become sentient because it doesn't have the ability to think on its own. It has to be told everything to think. And that's the idea between a free thinker and the sheeple.
But so you don't think that eventually AI will
No.
think for itself?
No. If you knew how AI was built, it's just giving a bunch of conditionals. That's all it is. It's if this, then this. If this, then this. That's how AI is generated. And we have data that is constructed a little bit more meticulously now because of the way that we've been able to construct it. So now there might be packages of different technology that handle different parts of the AI system. However, the very basis of it started with if this, then this. We're telling it exactly what the answer is on a binary statement. It's not thinking, it's saying, let's say, if the answer to 2 + 2 is always going to be 4. Now that works in a logical statement like that. However, if we said, if we're talking about a person, we said if black, then poor. We said if white, then this. If we said whatever we decided to say, that's the problem of AI, because it will never be able to definitively make its own, create its own opinion or thought. That's not consciousness. That's the blueprint of everyone else's consciousness. It is a.
Isn't that what the algorithm does? Is it's learning? It's learning by the more data that it has. It then takes that data, reconciles it,
What
and adjusts
algorithm do you mean exactly? What algorithm do you mean exactly? Like a YouTube algorithm?
Whatever algorithm.
Well, like in the YouTube algorithm, what happens is you still have to do something to tell it to do something. So
it's taking in information, and it's learning from that information.
Correct. Okay. But to say that it will eventually be able to make its own decisions based on a data bank that will never be the infinite, it will never have every single possibility.
Neither do I.
Exactly. However, you have the ability to formulate your own opinion. That only gets to formulate its opinions based on the facts that it's been given as fact, which are very,
How's that different than how I formulate my opinion? So I'm going to formulate my opinion.
Well, if you're a free thinker, you're
but I'm still my ability to make decisions is only limited to the amount of information that I have.
Yes, and
I have to have information to take in and therefore make decisions.
Your consciousness is also made up of all of your senses, your past experiences, the lineage of your family.
Information. Everything you just described there is just another form of information.
Yeah.
Right. And so
what I'm saying is that it will never have the ability to construct its own idea based on reasoning, emotion, things that make us intrinsically human that we cannot recreate. These are things that are and usually anti-human in nature and almost never just free information. What on the internet do you know of that is not already opinionated, that is direct fact that you can prove definitively that you found that it is a fact? What is there that you can directly say that exists on the internet that you can prove directly that is definitive fact that, well, and that's the other thing. See, there's I think the limit of it, right, is the way that you perceive information is based on what you believe is factual. AI is being told that things are directly factual. The reason that the sheeple mentality is how we refer to it is because they are being directly programmed to not think, to not challenge their minds, to believe the things that they are told. This is exactly what AI does. AI is told what to believe. So when they say that vaccinations are 100% safe, that's what an AI is going to tell you. However, there's conflicting results in both parties. And whether you want to talk about it being right or wrong or this or that, the factual information that you're going to receive, that you're going to make your opinion on, it's never going to be 100% factual because the MMR vaccine is never going to affect the two people exactly the same.
So I want to come back, and I think when I interrupted you earlier, you were about to tell me what the difference between endowing consciousness from a male to female perspective is. And before we wrap up, I would like to touch back on that.
Well, I don't believe that a female is actively endowing a person with consciousness. I believe that a female is the conduit at which the source is going to pass that portion of consciousness through. I believe it happens during pregnancy. So I believe that the only person that can do that is obviously a woman. And I think that that goes into what you were speaking about women normally having longer hair, the way that we treat women traditionally, the way that human beings have existed for always. I believe that there are things that we don't understand about our nature, like we discussed earlier, where you said Jesus didn't cut his hair, probably more because it wasn't part of the culture at that time.
However, didn't have a barber.
However, the culture has changed now, and we can see those changes now. And so once we make those changes, they, possibly could be irreversible, but what I'm saying is that we do things a certain way now, and it works really well. And so trying things a different way, there's a risk that it could be a lot better. There's a risk that it could be a lot worse. However, we could also see extreme changes that we're not attributing to that thing, right? So the cutting of hair, when I discussed that with you, you were saying that Jesus might have cut his hair if it was culturally acceptable or culturally able.
Or if they had scissors.
Right, that's what I'm saying. And so if he was able to, maybe he would. However, we wouldn't know that, right? Like, we know now that the aura of a person can be measured, and that usually it's more amplified if you have longer hair. And so we can see that it has changed something. And so because we can't directly know what the change is going to be when we stop doing it, or even for the next 10 generations of existence, it doesn't mean that it's not there, right? And I would go to assume that that is the same argument for God. That the people moving away from God are the ones that are destroying the ones that corrupt. I think if you have a higher power, a mission that you believe you are endowed with to serve and build something greater than yourself, and that is the motivation that you hold to do anything, then I believe that the things that you want come to you. And I believe that corruption exists because we've moved away from a platform of understanding God and humans as we are.
Well, I definitely enjoy the conversations and the thought experiments around consciousness. Especially the way that you view it as source consciousness. So this idea that consciousness is God. So I hope everybody watching has enjoyed it as well. We're going to wrap it up. Again, please like, share, subscribe, especially if you made it all the way to this point. If you're enjoying the content, if you're enjoying the discussions, please chime in. I will respond to comments, maybe you have a different perspective. Maybe you have questions that you'd like to ask, maybe you want to challenge some of the things that I've said or that Julian said. Either way, maybe you want to support some of the things that we've said. That kind of love is definitely welcomed and appreciated. So until next time, this is Cousin Chet, Julian. Y'all have a great day. See you next time.